Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Keeping Up With Conspicuous. Today we are joined by Ru Campbell, who is, I never know, I have got to point the opposite direction, which confuses me. But Ru is the practice lead for Microsoft Security, which is a big topic at the moment, at Threatscape. So thank you so much for obviously joining us, taking time out of your day. We greatly appreciate it. But how are things with you?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the invitation. It's good to join you. All good here. Like you said, very, very busy just now. There's a lot of demand for security in general, but Microsoft Security in particular is really accelerated over the last 5, 6, 7 years, and it's just doesn't show any signs of slowing down soon. So it's keeping me busy.
Absolutely. How many years have you been doing security for? What's the background? Have you always been in security? Were you in more of like a consultant role before?
Sure. So I've been in the IT industry for, I'm looking at the calendar here as if it's going to help me, for about 13 years now, just coming up 13 years. Started as, kind of jack of all trades, IT, help desk type role, moved into management. And then round about the start of the pandemic, so going back to 2020, made the move to consultancy. Originally just doing any type of Microsoft 365 consultancy, but very quickly carved out the niche in security because there weren't a whole bunch of other people doing it, and there was the opportunity there. I had some great employers that gave me some really good opportunities, and kind of the rest is history since there.
Interesting. I mean, it's definitely like security I hear a lot more nowadays, and obviously it's always been around, but as you said, last 5, 6 years or so, it really has accelerated. But I know we were sort of talking to another person within security, and since AI has become more known, it's just become a whole new world again, I think. But obviously you're currently the practice lead for security at Threatscape. So quite a cool name. I quite like it. Seems it's quite out there, isn't it? But what is it you guys do there?
Yep. Yeah, sure. Great question. So the bottom line is if it's anything to do with Microsoft Security, we kind of help customers out with it. Where we maybe more carve out our niche is what we describe as left of bang, or really what that means is preventative security. So you can kind of think of cybersecurity as, roughly speaking, falling under left of bang or right of bang. So right of bang would be, hey, you've had a problem, that being the bang, the explosion, the breach, the data security incident, whatever it is, the bad day at the office. And, folks will get in there and they'll do incident response and that type of thing. Now, we do that, but we more cater towards stopping that in the first place. So kind of preventative security. So looking at customers' environments, ascertaining what would be their best options to get them nice and secure before any of the bad stuff happens to begin with. And doing that with, I guess you would say, a degree of pragmatism, right? Because what we are very conscious of is that security, how to put this diplomatically, you can't, the reality is there's such a thing as too secure, right? Insofar as it can just completely kill your productivity and stop a business from doing anything, right? The CrowdStrike update from last year that kind of wiped out all these airport check-ins and all that kind of stuff, that's a good example where it wasn't that they were too secure, but the reality is the security product ended up causing more problems than the bad guys ever caused in that scenario, right? So we're always contending with these kind of real life balancing acts that go on with regards to security. And that's where we try to carve out our niche.
Interesting. Like, I don't think I've heard of a company that solely focuses on security, which, is amazing to start with. Like, that is quite a niche. Well, it's not niche. It is and it isn't it? Like,
yes,
everyone
correct.
has it, but having a specific practice.
100%. Yeah. So it's very niche in the Microsoft world, put it that way, right? Insofar as a lot of Microsoft partners, they'll kind of do a little bit of everything, and they'll have practices that cover all sorts of things. So they'll have an Azure practice, and they'll have a Microsoft 365 and a modern workplace practice and an AI practice and all the rest of it. Threatscape traces its roots back to around about the time of about the kind of the last recession back in about 2008, 9, 10, that kind of time period. And it was very much a strategic decision to focus purely on security. That's kind of things they describe themselves as at Threatscape, as pure play cybersecurity. So we don't just do Microsoft, but the reality is Microsoft has become an increasing part of the business purely because Microsoft security is such a hot topic at the minute.
And why do you think it was sort of overlooked prior to this all happening? Why do you think that was?
It's a good point. I think what you're kind of seeing just now and why there is such a boom in Microsoft security is the convergence of a few things. I think, first of all, Microsoft security, in terms of what Microsoft are investing in it, is absolutely enormous compared to where it was 5-10 years ago. So the reality is Microsoft, they just have more people working on security in-house. It's more of a strategic part of Microsoft's business. Used to be mostly relied on by third parties, but Microsoft are getting more involved from a first-party perspective. And really the other thing that there's a few things, but the other thing that comes to mind that plays along with that is, you mentioned AI earlier, that's part of it. But I would say just in general, the progression of cloud environments, insofar as the amount of data that companies hold, the reliance on the tech to keep companies up and running, coupled by the fact it's all in the cloud, and therefore the attackers are literally just one hop away from it, right? Because it's all ultimately available on the public internet. These things have all just converged, and you're at the stage now where there's a huge demand for cybersecurity. Honestly, my kind of hope, and this is kind of, I kind of, when I have these discussions with folks, I feel a bit like the turkey that voted for Christmas. But the reality is, I kind of want the cybersecurity industry to, honestly, like refocus or at least tune down a little bit, right? I don't think every customer should have to have 24/7 managed security operations, because what I would prefer is that the IT industry does a better job of secure by default and things like that, right?
Okay.
I don't see that happening anytime soon, though, right? So we're going to be here a little while.
Right. So do you think security can be overcomplicated then?
Oh, right. Yeah, 100%. Like,
Really?
no doubt. Yeah, no doubt about it. It's like everything in the industry, though. There's a lot of for all the good work that a lot of people do, the reality is there's a lot of fluff, there's a lot of pageantry and hype and all that kind of stuff, right? And even putting that aside, there is a tendency to focus on things that would give a disproportionate level of value to the company. So what I mean by that is, whenever we engage with customers, we try to help them with the big ticket items first of all. So you think of that kind of whole 80-20 principle, right? Where, 80% of your security could maybe be achieved with 20% of the work, right? And it's about achieving that kind of, I guess you could call it quick wins, but really it's just about prioritizing things. So, bring your own device and BYOD security, publicly exposed internet applications, MFA and strong authentication, all that type of stuff is where companies probably should focus. But what they tend to do is complicate things and focus on things that really may not give them security value. So as an example of that, AI came up earlier. AI security is important, but it's like, it's probably not the most important security area for a lot of folks. And I think that can confuse folks insofar as, while it's important, it's just not the most important thing, if that answers the question.
That's super interesting to hear, though, because obviously from an outsider's perspective, I would have automatically jumped the gun and been like, yeah, AI security now, that must be everyone's priority, like, because it's
So it is everyone's priority just now. And I guess where I try to help customers at is reprioritize and figure out what's the stuff that most matters. And that's not to say it doesn't matter. It's just to say that if we look at the real risks and the data and the statistics to say, hey, here's the stuff that's going to lose you the most money if a certain type of attack happens, AI security is typically quite low down in that. Not to say it'll be low down forever, but it's just not the most important thing as of right now.
Right. So it's more about getting like the basics and fundamentals, still making them secure in order for the
Yeah.
AI security to actually be beneficial.
Yes, 100%, 100%. And the way that I kind of look at it is, I get part of my background and part of my bias is making analogies to things like health and fitness, right? Insofar as
Right.
the fundamentals of staying healthy and having a good level of fitness, they haven't changed in about 100,000 years. And what I mean by
Yes.
that is it's stuff like don't consume too much, don't binge on really unhealthy stuff, and perform an adequate level of exercise, right? That's the short version.
Yeah.
That said, there is a lot of emerging science that, while it can, I wouldn't say it can kind of hack your way around those things, it can definitely supplement those things and help improve on those baselines. But 80% of that health and fitness is going to come from the fundamentals. Exact same for security. 80% of your security benefit isn't going to come from the new shiny technology that just came out. It will come from the fundamentals that have been in place since the kind of start of the computer revolution, right? Insofar as minimizing the attack surface, requiring strong levels of authentication, and all that kind of good stuff.
Right. You definitely spoke my language there. That made sense with the whole health and fitness. Good analogy. So yeah, that's good. And I mean, obviously, I know we sort of said that you can overcomplicate security, which is completely fair enough. Now, I'm sure in terms of your portfolio of clients, they can range quite a lot in terms of large enterprise companies and maybe those smaller, nearer startup companies. I'm assuming, by the way, is that right?
Yep, no, you're spot on. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And obviously, with that, do the security elements and what you're looking at change, or is there still that baseline of it does sort of the majority does fit?
Really good question. I guess the fundamentals are very similar, but there would be differences in the details. So, for example,
Right.
if you think of, I guess, what you would maybe call, well, I'll tell you what, one of the distinctions is maybe if you go back to around about maybe like that kind of 2010 to 2012-ish period, companies that were established since then, quite often they're quote unquote born in the cloud, right? They've only ever existed within Azure or within Google Cloud, Google Workspace, all that type of stuff, right? You go back a bit further, companies that have been around prior to that, I mean, the reality is some companies are hundreds of years old, right? But companies that maybe started their technology space going back to the 60s, the 70s, the 2000s, they'll have far different technology in place, right? They'll still have, for example, on-premises Active Directory, which has been with us now for 25 years. And therefore, the problems that they face are just different to the problems that a cloud-native customer would face. That said, that's like a detail, right? It's the software you're using is different, but how you secure it is going to be reasonably similar, right? It's things like keeping it up to date, making sure you don't have too many admins, making sure access to it is secure, and all that kind of stuff.
That makes sense. I just always find it fascinating because I would always expect there to be so much more to be going on in like those massive companies, but then you, as you said, you sort of whittle it down, and that baseline, it is all gonna technically be the same, just with the additional add-ons on from that side of things.
Yeah, 100%.
Have you ever what have you got any case studies of things where it hasn't gone right and how you've maybe fixed it, or things that have gone really well and the reasons why it went really well?
Oh, geez. Yeah, you don't talk about the ones that didn't go so well, right? That's the whole deal. Sure. So I can, a few things come to mind. The ones that don't go well, they tend to be big, grandiose projects, right? So, for example, when we help customers, I could probably break it down into two types of project. You have projects that will affect day-to-day business operations and projects that won't. So as an example, think of like simple, boring stuff like the antivirus that's used on a device. If you're a CISO, an IT director, or something like that, the bottom line is the end user, they don't know or care what antivirus is on their device. So if you have a project to remove an antivirus software and replace it with a new antivirus software, then the reality is the business doesn't care about that. That's for you and your team to go away and manage. What we're kind of actually starting to see, though, is as data security has become more and more important because of things like regulations like GDPR and NIS2, data security projects are far more end user affecting. I experience the changes that you want me to go through as part of my day-to-day life. So I'll give you some examples of that. Let's say, for example, all of a sudden the business now requires me to classify every Word file or Excel file I create or every email I send, and I have to apply a label to it and say, hey, this is confidential or highly confidential or not confidential, so that the business can then apply different rules to different types of data. This is something in Microsoft Purview that's called sensitivity labeling. The bottom line is, if you're going to make a change like that, that affects every single person in the company probably, and it just changes their day-to-day experience. And where I'm going with this is to say, for that type of project, if you don't have buy-in from the highest level of the business downwards, that project's probably going to fail. Whereas, I'll make the comparison to like an antivirus migration, whereas that might be handled in-house by, the IT folks who, hey, we just like the new one, so we're going to move to there. Nobody needs to know about this project. Those other projects that affect the user experience, so they make you less productive, maybe because I need to classify an email every time I send it, maybe because I need to do MFA every time I now sign in, that type of thing, unless you have business buy-in from the top down, all it takes is one influential person, like executive level or board level or something like that, to object to the project, shoot it down, and that project's just never going to get picked up again. And all of that, I guess, is to kind of say that, number one, pick your battles. That's an obvious one. But number two, if you're going to pick these big, grandiose projects from a security perspective, you have to make sure you get business buy-in. And I'll tell you what, one obvious example of that coming up now is Copilot, right? We're seeing a lot of interest now where the business comes to IT and says, hey, we want Copilot. And IT then has to kind of stumble about and figure out, okay, well, are we ready for Copilot? And what you'll maybe find in some scenarios is IT has to make a lot of changes to get the business secure enough to use Copilot, right? With data security and access to files and stuff like that. And therefore, under those circumstances, you're probably going to get the business buy-in to have a data security project. But unless you've got the business coming to you with a reason for it, you're probably going to stumble about a lot with that one. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. I mean, just talking to you, it is such a complex thing to talk about. And just from a soft skills perspective, like individuals like yourself who are dealing with security, you have to be so good at being able to communicate it to the end users and stuff. So it's interesting hearing you speak about it and the way you would talk about it. Obviously, I think you forget that IT people can't just go in and change things. There is a whole bigger picture as a business. And I think I would have overlooked the fact that the directors and everything of the company, they really need to understand what's going on. So do you feel like an approach for those larger companies, do you sit down with the directors and everything as well as the IT team to make sure it's communicated and like given the correct message? Is that the approach you guys have to take to be precautionary of future issues?
Yes, 100%. Insofar as that each project will kind of determine who you have to work with to make that project a success, right? But increasingly, we are having to work with folks at that board/executive level to make them fully understand the consequences of engaging in stuff, right? So as an example, customer I worked with a little while ago, they had been on premises for a long time. They eventually moved to Microsoft 365. So they were getting all their email out of their own servers and into Microsoft 365. And they wanted to start saying, hey, we want to start classifying our data and putting labels on it and all this kind of stuff. And where we step in is at that executive level, is actually to help them reprioritize and say, okay, well, great, you want to do labeling and data classification, but you've got this big open gate here, or this open door over here that would just let the bad guys walk right through. So instead, while this is what you're hoping to achieve is important, let's get to that later and let's focus on the big ticket items. And increasingly having that security discussion with executive level rather than just, for example, management or operational level. That's just happening more and more and more because the stakes are kind of high now because of regulations and fines and things like that.
Yeah, no, that's good to clarify. And I think it is super important what you just touched upon is actually, although there's great things about security and you can get to that final goal, it's like, actually, you still need to be aware of this and just being completely transparent to be like, this can cause that. And I think, yeah, to be successful at implementing security, you've got to be aware of the full picture, even if it's the negatives as well, which some people find hard to communicate, but you can't avoid it.
Yep. No, 100%. It's there's no such thing as a perfect solution is the bottom line, and everything's just going to be a trade-off. And we want to help customers be as secure as possible, but they have to be aware of, hey, sure, you can ramp up that dial for security, but that might have unintended consequences, and here's what they might be, right? And then it's just about making an informed decision about which is the bigger risk. Is it the risk from of not doing something and then you get attacked, for example? Or is maybe the bigger risk actually you bite off more than you can chew, and in your security ambitions, you make things tougher for users day to day?
Absolutely. And so for those people, back to sort of Microsoft and Dynamics. So for those people and businesses who are using D365 and Power Platform, like, what would your recommendations be to them in this current day and age, if we keep it super relevant now?
Yep. Well, the obvious and most commercial answer I can give you is talk to me. The second answer that I guess I would give you is, yep. There's what I'm going to say. It kind of hurts me to say this because it's such a cliche and such a meme at this point. But there's a saying that goes that quote unquote identity is the new security perimeter, and what that really means is the account that you use to sign into things like Power Platform and Dynamics. In the background, that's an Entra ID account. It's your Microsoft account. And getting into that account in 9 out of 10 attacks it's the single hop an attacker needs to make, right? To get to your data, to get to the money, to get to the assets at which they can, exfiltrate sensitive information or blackmail you or stuff like that. So if you're, for example, a Dynamics administrator, a Power Platform administrator, maybe a jack of all admin across the Microsoft platform, probably the biggest bang for your buck in terms of security investment and return on your time is the identity security, insofar as things like conditional access and making sure that folks have to do all that good stuff like MFA, and they can't sign in if they're a high risk, and they can't sign in from unallowed locations and things like that. So that's the second thought that comes to mind. And the third thought that comes to mind for securing, particularly Power Platform, is as far as data security goes, Power Platform is a little bit of a mess insofar as, number one, it's enabled for all users by default, right? So any user in the company can pick this thing up and start creating flows to send data anywhere. Anyone in your company, yeah, not pointing any fingers. Any user in your company could create a flow that says, hey, every time I get an email, forward it to this Google address over here. And it's like, okay, well, that's a good way to start having unsanctioned data flows, right? And sending company information to a personal mailbox, which you won't want. Anyone could create a flow that says, every time I save a OneDrive file, also upload it to my personal Dropbox. And that's opening you up for all sorts of kind of data security legislation and compliance requirements. So it is a little bit of a minefield. And so one easy solution to that is just don't enable it for folks that don't need it. But then the follow-up answer to that is, yeah, maybe. Yeah. I wasn't going to, like I said, I wasn't going to name any names. But also, there's a lot of good recommendations and baselines out there. Over in the USA, the CISA they have really good baselines for what would secure Power Platform environments look like. Say, here's all the settings you can go away and configure and review and stuff like that. So that'd be one good call to action, is for folks to follow those security baselines so that they can kind of harden it and get it ready for productive but also secure work.
Right. Okay. I mean, it's interesting because obviously I'm a user of Dynamics. I'll get on to how I've used Power Platform. But it's interesting because I'm sitting here and I'm like, how secure are we? So if my boss is watching, he'll be like, let's block Lucy from being able to do any flows. But you forget, don't you? Like in the wrong hands. Like I was only building, what was it? Power page maybe. What was I doing? I can't remember. It's long ago now. But I was building a flow to like be able to. Oh, I was building a dashboard. Ignore me. But obviously I was using different flows to be able to input the data that I wanted.
Right.
I'm not a techie person. I'm not intelligent with how to use IT yet. But you forget, like if someone got a YouTube video up, they could be like, oh, let's do this, and be quite sneaky with it. And if in the wrong hands, which, yeah, I mean, we're a trustworthy company, and I'm personally, I don't have the knowledge to be able to use stuff like that. But it is crazy to think in certain businesses actually know, like, maybe you shouldn't enable Lucy to, let's block her from doing stuff just in case. Interesting. But they're really good points.
And part of the thought process is also, okay, we trust we trust our staff, right? So we trust Lucy, allegedly. So how do we? But it's also about thinking, well, what if the bad guys get their hands on this? So, for example, I trust Joe Bloggs in finance. He gets unrestrained control to do what he wants in Power Platform. But what if his account gets compromised and nobody ever notices it? And someone sets up a Power Flow on his behalf that starts sending out all his OneDrive and his SharePoint files over to some, bad actor over there.
Yeah.
So it's really about monitoring for these types of things. And this is part of the thing you have to contend with. And it's part of why it is becoming such a quote unquote booming industry in security, is you really have to think like the bad guy, and you have to think like the attacker. And a lot of folks struggle with that, right? Because, hey, you're not meant to think like that. That's probably not a healthy thing for 99% of people. But where security pros and where me and my company step in is to say, okay, well, here's what you're doing. That's all good and all. Now let's think about how the bad guys could leverage this and potentially exploit you, and find that balance of making their life a living hell while also hopefully keeping you secure and productive.
I like it. Nice and simple way to put it, to be honest. But yeah, I think with the rise of the amount of people using Microsoft tools now, like, it is such an important thing to cover. And as even end users like us, being aware of like what we should technically be putting in place to keep us safe. Because so many other things can get in the way of your mindset of your tech, and you'll be like, oh, I need to do this. But sometimes security can be forgotten about, especially, I think it's more so in the smaller companies. Like they may overlook it a little bit more because you don't think so far into it. But that's just from my perspective and my view. But security, tech's always evolving, which means security is definitely always evolving, and you've probably got to be one step ahead, really. How do you keep up with it? How do you actually know what's going on? How do you know, like, because I assume from when you first started in, tech security, it's come miles.
Yes, correct. Yeah, it's I mean, whenever you talk to any of the kind of people in the quote unquote Microsoft community, they all struggle with the same problem, and it's keeping up to date with stuff, right? For me, it's a combination of a few things. Over the last year or so, I'd say a big part of it is like physical travel and going to events and stuff like that. So, right. Microsoft conferences like Scottish Summit, Workplace Ninjas UK, user groups in person, going out to visit customers, finding out what their problems are and then how can we fix them, and going over to the Microsoft offices in Redmond to figure out, well, what's coming down the pipeline. When I go to physical events, I absorb more rather than just sitting watching webinars and stuff like that. That said, honestly, tons of it just comes from being on places like Twitter/X. LinkedIn is a good source. There are tons and tons of blogs out there. Part of the problem is it can just get really hard to switch off, right? Because you stop doing your job at like 5:30, and all of a sudden you're like, it's 6 o'clock and you're on LinkedIn on your phone, and you're like, this isn't normal, this isn't healthy. Why am I on LinkedIn when I you know what I mean? It's like, anyway,
Yeah.
you get the point. But
It's
there's a lot of
addictive.
sources. Social media is really good for it. Yep.
Okay. No, it's useful to hear it from your perspective. I think we'll probably, I reckon we might see an uptake over the next 5 to 10 years of the amount of security roles that are around. I've definitely, been aware a lot more of security roles at the moment, but I probably one of a few years back. So it's good to know that if anyone wants to go into that area, how they can start learning about it. Obviously, events is very key. Are you going to any events? If anyone wanted to meet you in person and ask you lots of questions,
Yeah, sure.
Are you anywhere this year?
I am, yes. So if there's any MVPs watching and you want to pick my brains, I'll be at the MVP Summit in Redmond in March. And I'm also there's a big event in Edinburgh called Workplace Ninjas UK. So I'll be at that as well. Hopefully me and my team will all be there, still working on that. We'll see if we can pull it off. But yeah, I'm also not very difficult to find on places like Twitter and LinkedIn. So if anyone's ever got any questions, I'm usually happy to help.
Absolutely. We'll get Helena to pop in the comments just links to everything where people can find you, which will be super useful because I'm sure people will have questions. And with that, obviously, me and Ru have just been nattering on. So if we've missed any comments, we'll go back to you and we'll respond after the podcast if there's any questions that need answering. Obviously, Ru, it's so interesting talking about security because it's just an area that I really don't know much about. And it there's so many questions. I appreciate when it comes to topics like this, I am not the best at articulating some of my questions. So thank you so much for understanding and being able to answer them as best as you can. As I said, there's so many other topics surrounding this area. So it'll be good to keep up to date with you and what you're doing. And if there's anything fascinating in the world of security, let us know and we can help get the word out about it because it is such a big thing. I don't know whether you've got any final thoughts before we ask you our little last question of the pod.
Oh, geez. Well, first off, thanks again for the invitation. It was good chatting with you. And I guess the other thing is I'm thinking about, based on the line of work you do, and I'm thinking about helping folks with career aspirations and all that kind of thing. One thought that comes to mind for me as a kind of closing thought, for anyone that does have aspirations, either to get into security as a new venture or to improve where they're at just now within it, is one thing that's so obvious to me is this is a field that really just rewards being obsessive. If you can put in the time and the effort, and maybe more importantly, then put yourself out there as well through blogging, through videos, all that kind of stuff, opportunities really do come your way. You know what I mean? That's been the number one thing that's really helped me achieve success in my career, and probably what you would see a lot in recruitment as well, I'm assuming.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's really good advice, that, and I think it's a good final thought to leave on. Now, I don't know whether you've watched or got to the end of a podcast of ours, but the final question always looms, which is, if you are not Ru Campbell, MVP, practice lead at Microsoft Security at Threatscape, what would you be in? You can't be in tech. You can't have a job in tech. Where would you be? What would you do?
So I can't just choose a different. Yeah, I get it. That'd be cheating if I just chose a different company.
It would.
Oh, geez. Well, there's the dream job, and then there's the realistic job, right?
We can hear both.
Okay, cool. Let's go for it. Dream job would probably something in the music industry. Big, obsessive, crazy person about all sorts of music. Realistic job. This is going to sound so geeky, but it's an IT podcast, so of course it's going to be geeky. I get a thing for economics as well. I would probably be some type of economics if it wasn't in IT. That was always going to be one of the subsequent things I would get into and study if IT never worked out for me. Fortunately, it worked out pretty well for me. So the world is spared of my economic views for now.
Brilliant. Well, it's always such a good question to end on, because I just like knowing other people's interests and stuff. So thank you for that. And honestly, it's been so lovely speaking to you. I know we've met in person at Scottish Summit and stuff, but actually being able to talk about your passion and your obsession, it's good. So hopefully we'll stay in contact. Obviously, as I said, any comments and stuff we'll get back to. But if not, thank you very much, and we'll see everyone next week.